I am Dr. David Croto, and I am here with Dr. Dave Cashin, Professor of Intercultural Studies and Islamics. Dr. Cashin, I'm so excited to have you here today because I have a question for you. My question is, what are the 7 essential questions?
David, thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity. I actually brought my book along, so if anybody ever wants to see what the 7 questions are, it's available both in a format that you can get electronically or as a hardcover book. I like to think of this as imitating Jesus. Now, I haven't done this research myself, but I read a sermon outline from a guy who claimed that Jesus made 303 questions in the New Testament, in the Gospels, of course. And the thing that struck me about doing evangelism is that much of the time people get rebuffed. They've learned a system to share the gospel, and when you get rebuffed enough, you don't tend to do evangelism like you ought to. And I think most Christians don't share their faith very much. So about 20 years ago, I decided to design a question way of doing evangelism, partly as an element of some of my classes, where students would go out and interview people to learn their worldview, their way of looking at life.
Can you define worldview for me?
Yeah, worldview is, well, basically it's the assumptions that people make about reality. And the 7 questions revolve around those basic assumptions of what life is. And I can name them here for you really quickly. Question number 1 is origins. Where do human beings come from? Question number 2 is power. How do we get power for successful living? Question number 3 is what's my purpose? What's my destiny? Where am I going? Question number 4 has to do with truth. How do I know true from untrue? Question number 5 has to do with ethics. How do I know right from wrong? And then the final 2 questions are what's the nature of humankind's problem? And what's the solution? Now, the way I do this is I will go, well, actually I did this last night with a lady at a local pharmacy. I don't want to try to have a half-hour conversation. This is something I designed when I was going to the Y. And you'd have little 3 minutes, 5 minutes for a quick conversation before you did something else. And you can do this in almost any kind of a context. And I would say to the person, hey, you know, I'm really interested in people's cultures and worldviews. Would you be interested in answering 7 questions about your worldview for me? And not all at one go. We're only going to meet like maybe once, 1 question per time that we meet, because this would be in circumstances where we meet regularly, like the pharmacy, like the Y. And I would say, I'd run through the questions. I'd say, here are the 7 questions. Origins, where do we come from? Power, how do we get empowered for living? Destiny, what's my purpose? Why am I here? Where am I going? What's right? How do we know true from untrue? How do we know right from wrong? What's the nature of humankind's problem? What's the solution to that problem? Would you mind answering those questions for me? Now, I've done this literally thousands of times over the last 20 years. I've only once had a person say no. So it tends to be an open thing. Although people are a little skeptical at the start, oh, where is this going? What I love about this is that at each stage, they give me permission to continue. And I'll be illustrating that in our next session that we're going to do. But those are 7 questions that really identify what's important in a person's life. Origins. Am I the product of evolution? Am I the product of chance? Or am I the product of some kind of creative design? Power. People are always thinking about this. How can I better myself? How can I get empowered for successful living? Destiny. This is a great one with most people these days because I don't know how many times I've had a person say to me, I have absolutely no idea where I'm going. I have no idea what my destiny is. You know, when you're following Jesus, you've got good answers to every one of ththese questions.
I found the question of destiny really helps me to unpack what their view of the gospel is.
Yeah,
and not just where you're going to go, but how do you know where you're going to go? That really helps unpack that issue.
Exactly. Yeah. Truth is the same kind of a situation. It's as simple as many times if you ask, how do you know true from untrue? People will just give you a blank stare because it's like, I don't know how to answer that question. So I'll often unpack it in some simple ways. The simplest form of truth is what you pay attention to and what you ignore. What's important to you? Whatever is important to you, that's your truth. Also, what's authority for you? Is there anything that's authoritative? Is there a text, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, the Bible, what your mom and dad said or what grandpa said? What's authoritative to you? And then what's persuasive? If you hear something, what would be the aspect of that would make you think, yeah, that's probably true? By the way, you'll find over and over again, people will say a good story. If it really sounds true and real, that speaks to me. Then you get to the question of ethics, and there you get all kinds of interesting stuff. How do you know right from wrong? Is it what mom and dad said? Again, is there authoritative structure? Are you a relativist and kind of like, well, whatever works for you is what's right, or no, I don't want to hurt anybody. As long as I don't hurt anyone, that's my ethical system. Key in this whole question and answer process is non-judgmental attitude. And I often say that right at the start. I'm not going to tell you as we go through these questions whether I agree with you or not. Or I'm not going to, argue with you or try to convince you of another position. I'm here to listen and understand. The final two questions, what's the nature of humankind's problem? Wow, you get some fun stuff. I had this one lady, and I hope you don't mind if I do a quick story. There was this one lady I met in the airport in Frankfurt, Germany. She was Ukrainian, actually, heading to the Ukraine. And she was working for Philip Morris. And her job as a marketing expert was to get young people to smoke cancerettes, okay? So she goes through describing this to me at her start, and we get into the 7 questions. She gets to question number 6, what's the nature of humankind's problem? And she says, people are just so selfish. They don't care about other people. They only care about themselves. And suddenly she stopped. And I knew exactly what was going on in her head, because she was thinking, I've told this guy that I'm marketing cancerettes to make myself wealthy so other people can die. And it was just astonishing. I didn't have to convict of sin. She was convicted herself as she answered the question. It was also interesting when we got to the final question, what's the solution? She kind of hissed, there is no solution because people can't change. The only time I ever disagreed with anybody in a conversation like this was at that point. And I said, that's not true. I said, look at me. What do I look like? Well, you're a professor. You've got you've got your computer and all the rest of it. What would you think if I told you that I was a drug addict and that I spent lots of time in the back seats of police cars? What would you think of that? And she just got this astonished look on her face. And I said, people can change through the gospel of Jesus. Now, I think she wasn't open to the gospel at that point, and normally I don't jump that fast into the gospel, but remember the Holy Spirit, okay? Let the Spirit move as you go through this. But those are my 7 questions and how I use them in coming to understand other people's worldview.
That's fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you.